to the children's story this morning. You have your outline. There's an outline in the bulletin. We're going to be in the 4th chapter of James in just a few moments. I do want to welcome all of you that are here, especially those who are joining us online from wherever you are. We are always grateful that you are here, and especially as we go through this study in the book of James. So as I look around the room, I realize that many of us are in different stages of our spiritual journey, and I think no matter where you are on that journey, that we can all agree that the Bible is shockingly real in all areas, but especially so when it becomes about relational conflicts. It doesn't try to sugarcoat it, doesn't try to whitewash it, doesn't deny that relationships are hard. Right here in this book, we have the good, the bad, and the ugly. If you want to read it, it's there. There's a sibling rivalry between Cain and Abel. We had the very first murder in the history of the world. There's a tremendous tension between Moses and his wife Zipporah that led to a separation. There's an unbelievable ego-driven popularity contest and all the drama that goes with it between King Saul and this rising military star we call David. And it's all there because Saul battled with insecurity issues. Then there is a deep-seated resentment held by Martha towards her sister Mary, who was playing Martha Stewart in the kitchen while her sister Mary just sat listening to Jesus in the other room. The Bible is full of relationships that end up in the ditch. Let's admit it, all of us at one time or another struggle with relational issues. Even Ruth Graham, the wife of Billy Graham, was asked if she ever considered divorcing Billy. Divorce never, but murder a few times, was her response. I hope that makes you feel better. Last week we were in James 3, and I want to go back to James 3 just for a few moments, and I want to look to begin with at the very last verse in James 3. Before we get there, let me just get the outline straight. So the first point is that James calls us to be peacemakers. James calls us to be peacemakers. Now, those are not unfamiliar words to the Church of the Brethren. Some of you do not come from the rich background of the Anabaptist and the Church of the Brethren, but we are one of the original peace churches. It has been a familiar part of who we are for over 300 years. So when James calls us to be peacemakers in that 18th verse, let me read it for you. And those who are peacemakers will plant seeds of peace and reap a harvest of righteousness. I want you to note the highlighted word, peacemakers. You see, when James wrote and when all of the New Testament writers wrote, they didn't have divisions. Well, this is chapter 1 and this is chapter 2. Those came hundreds of years later. So 3:18 butts right up against 4:1. They made 4:1, 4:1 years later. But the train of thought continues. I think James is trying to paint a picture of what our relationships could look like. That in the middle of relational conflict, marital conflict, family conflict, political conflict, that you can reap a harvest of righteousness if you will plant seeds of peace. Throughout the book of James, we've been dealing with relationship bumps. In chapter 2, the issue was favoritism. They were showing favoritism to the wealthy, to the elites. and dishonoring the people who lived on the margins. Last week it was all about how we use our tongue and the words we use and how soul damaging they can be when we use them badly. I suspect as James writes these words to conclude what we call chapter 3 about being a peacemaker, that the people who are receiving this letter are saying, but James, you don't know who I'm married to. I know we've never thought those words, okay? You don't know my mom. You don't know my dad. You don't know my sister. You don't know my coworker and how they have wrecked my life. You don't know them. You don't know my history. You don't know the things that they have said or done to me. So then he begins the next chapter. Let's just look at the first verse to begin with. What is causing the quarrels and fights among you? Don't they come from the evil desires at war within you? He asks the question, and there's that word, causing. Got it highlighted. What is causing the quarrels and the fights? And our natural reaction, every one of us, is it's her, or it's him, or it's them. It's my mother-in-law's fault. Someone has said that, oh, forget that joke. I'll just leave that one out. It's against mother-in-laws, and I had a good one, so we'll just leave that one out. We go on and we say it's the coach, it's the umpire, it's my boss. But here's the question. This is it, number 2. What is at the center of our conflicts? What is at the center of our conflicts? So I want to read verses 1 to 10. I want to read the entire section all together, and then we're going to look at what James says about what is at the center of our conflicts. Let's begin with verse 1. What's causing the quarrels and fights among you? Don't they come from the evil desires at war within you? You want what you don't have, so you scheme and you kill to get it. You are jealous of what others have, but you can't get it. So you fight and you wage war to take it away from them. Yet you don't have what you want because you don't ask God for it. And even when you ask, you don't get it because your motives are all wrong. You want only what will give you pleasure. You adulterers, don't you realize that friendship with the world makes you an enemy of God? I say it again. If you want to be a friend of the world, you make yourself an enemy of God. Do you think the scriptures have no meaning? They say that God is passionate, that the Spirit He has placed within us should be faithful to Him, and He gives grace generously, as the scripture says. God opposes the proud, but gives grace to the humble. So humble yourselves before God. Resist the devil, and he will flee from you. Come close to God, and God will come close to you. Wash your hands, you sinners. Purify your hearts. For your loyalty is divided between God and the world. Let there be tears for what you have done. Let there be sorrow and deep grief. Let there be sadness instead of laughter and gloom instead of joy. Humble yourselves before the Lord, and He will lift you up. So that's our question. What's causing the quarrels and the fights among you? So before we look at how James answers it, I want us to bring up on the screen again verses 1 and 2. Let's read it again. Notice the highlighted words. What is causing the quarrels and fights among you? Don't they come from the evil desires at war within you? You want what you don't have, so you should be highlighted, that's my fault, scheme and kill to get it. You are jealous of what others have, but you can't get it, so you fight and wage war to take it away from them. Yet you don't have what you want because you don't ask God for it. So what's the problem? You are the problem. You got it. It's as vague as a Mack truck on the interstate. All right, letter A. There is a war going in the center of the universe. There's a war going on in the center of the universe. We are it. There's a war in the center, and it's us. There's a war that's going on in the soul of every living being, including you and me. And it is the root of all of our fights and quarrels that go on between us. The war at the center of the fights that you had at work this week, or at the center of the battle going on in the Middle East, and in your vehicle on the way to church today, if you had an argument on the way to church today, and sometimes that happens, you are at the center of it. Jesus says to Christians, the relational conflict we have all come from the war raging inside each one of us. We are at the center of the universe. In the previous chapter, chapter 3, verse 16, he refers to God being jealous or to people having jealous and selfish ambition. They arise in our lives when our friends drive us. You see, we get jealous. Our friend drives a nicer vehicle than we do, and we get jealous. Our neighbors have 9-foot ceilings, and we have 8-foot ceilings. James says, because of the battles that rage inside you, we scheme and we kill to get whatever it is that we want. You want that deal at the end of the day. You want to close that big deal, have that big program. You want that big account. There are people that go out of their ways to do it. You say, but I've never killed anyone. I've never put a neck to anyone's throat or a knife to anyone's throat. But let me ask you, how many times have you stabbed somebody in the back so you could get what you wanted? Maybe you stabbed them in the back by the words that you use. I heard of people getting into computer files just to wreck someone's career. People who create anonymous social media accounts to post untrue or destructive posts about people. People will go to great lengths to destroy others and make themselves look good, always putting you at the center of the universe. In the next 2 verses, James reveals who is really at the center of the universe. And by the way, it's not me, and it's not you. All right, B. There is someone in the center of the universe, and it's not you, and it's not me. Verse 4 says, you adulterers, don't you realize the friendship with the world makes you, note the highlight, enemy of God. I say it again, if you want to be a friend of the world, you make yourself an enemy of God. The God he is talking about is the God who spoke the world into creation, the galaxies, the vast heavens, and the earth. He is talking about the all-knowing God of the creation. So don't get derailed by how significant you think you are, because you really aren't very significant, and neither am I. But let's focus on an amazing God who created it all and put into place the master plan. Here's the story of what God says about you and me, and this is what James writes. It's in 14, verse 14. You think you're pretty hot stuff. We do think sometimes we get pretty arrogant. I'll just give you an example. Coach Prime is a football coach at the University of Colorado, and by all accounts, he's a man of God, a man of faith. But when I hear him, I hear nothing but arrogance. I hear nothing but, look at me, look at me, look at me. Listen to what he says to the arrogant, or to you and me. It's not just Dion. We all face this. So here's what it says in verse 14. How do you know what your life will be like tomorrow? Your life is like the morning fog. It's here a little while, and then it's gone. Did you get that? We're nothing more than the morning fog, or some translations say a mist, and poof, it's gone. That's how significant you and I are before God. But God is forever, as we sang this morning in that great song, Holy Forever. He is from everlasting to everlasting. And when he created the vast universe, he goes big. I mean really big. And yet in that great big vast universe where I am small, he entered into that world when he went small. To be born to the Virgin Mary, a cell inside a teenage virgin. So why did he do it that way? He did it to tell every one of us that there's no length that he would go to communicate how crazy he is about you and me. It is overwhelming to me that this amazing, all-knowing, all-creating, all-transcendent God became small and became one of us so you and I could know that he loved us. And you can embrace him and you can experience him. But there's one thing you need to know. I should have made it a major point. I'm sorry that it's letter C in my outline. But this is something you need to know. God is crazy about you. God is crazy. If you don't hear anything else I say today, you need to walk out the door here today and know God is absolutely crazy in love with you. Verse 5 says, do you think the scriptures have no meaning? They say that God is passionate, that the Spirit he has placed within us should be faithful to him. I want you to note that word that is highlighted, passionate. Other translations say jealous. That God is a jealous God. He is a jealous God. Not in a codependent, creepy sort of way. He just is crazy about you. Now, I love my wife, Brenda, and I've been crazy about her for almost 51 years. And I still can't believe, and some of you probably agree with me, that you can't believe she took pity on me. I remember the day she called me, and I was in Tennessee in seminary, and she called me and told me that she had filed for the marriage license, that it was $7. I'll never forget that. She told me a dog license was also $7, and she was deciding between the two to get. That is a fact, by the way. But if my wife, who, by the way, would never showed inappropriate affection to another guy, do you think I'd be okay with that? Absolutely not. I'd be jealous. Not because of some unhealthy codependency. It's just that I'm crazy about her. And I assure you, she would never do that. So you need to know today that no matter what you have done or where you are at this stage in your life, God has never, ever stopped loving you. There's a new song out by a singing group called Cain. It's a brother and two sisters. Their latest song is called Anymore. That's all it's called, Anymore. Let me give to you the first verse and chorus. You get a voice in your head, that same old guilt and regret you've heard 1,000 times before. After the choices you made, you're waiting for me to say, I couldn't love you anymore. The enemy, note that word, the enemy has lied to you, but listen to me, here's the truth. I couldn't love you anymore than I do right now. There's nowhere I wouldn't go to get to you, my child. Take a look at the cross. Then you'll know it's for sure. I couldn't love you anymore. I want you to know, above everything else that we talk about today, God is crazy about you. And He's not worried about your past. We all have a past. And the path to peace begins with us discovering that we are not the center of the universe, but that a God who is crazy in love with you and me is at the center of the universe. All right, number 3. When God is at the center of the universe. So what happens when God is at the center of the university? James verse 10 says, humble yourselves before the Lord, and He will lift you up in honor. Humble yourselves before the Lord, and He will lift you up in honor. We are to become very humble. That's letter A. We become very humble. It's hard for some of us to be humble. We're kind of like Fonzie on Happy Days, who whenever he had to admit that he was wrong, he would say, I was wrong. He couldn't say the word wrong. It wasn't his image. But we need to humble ourselves and admit that we don't have it all together right now or at any other time without God. I heard about an older couple that met in a nursing home. They began eating their meals together, and one day the man said, will you marry me? And she said, yes, immediately. The next day the man woke up and said, I remember asking her if she would marry me, but I couldn't remember her answer. So he found her down the hall and said, I remember asking you to marry me, but I couldn't remember your answer. She said it was yes. And she said she was so glad I spoke to her because she knew she had said yes, but she couldn't remember who had asked her. I'd have to check with our nursing home people about those romances that are going on there. It can be humbling to admit our weaknesses to another person. It's hard to admit that we have shortcomings and faults. I know long-time friendships that have disintegrated because no one would give forgiveness. So many marriages break up because one or both won't even ask for forgiveness. We can't humble ourselves because we want to win at all costs. We want to be right. When you are humble, it is easier to say, "I'm sorry," and ask for forgiveness. While pride wrecks relationships, humility can restore them. It can be humbling to admit your weaknesses to another person, but we need to do it. I watched people sit in church, read from the same Bible, sing the same songs, and haven't spoken to each other in years. We just can't humble ourselves. Some of us in the room have tattered relationships that are going to stay that way until one or both of us humble ourselves before God and each other. When you're humble, it's easier to say, "I'm sorry," and ask for forgiveness. We need to remember, humility is the soil for peacemaking and peacekeeping. And B, verse 8, says we are to draw close to God. The closer you draw to God, the closer He will draw to you. You know, probably every day we have 100 days, 100 times, when we have a choice about whether we're going to draw closer to God or not. When the alarm goes off, we have a choice to pray to God, "I'm going to draw close to you today." When someone you live with or work with or go to church with and they disappoint you, and they will disappoint you because they're human, we have a choice in that moment to choose to explode or choose to come close to God. The closer you get to God, the closer you come to seeing yourself as you really are. Luke 14:11. Here's what Jesus said. "For those who exalt themselves will be humbled, and those who humble themselves will be exalted." It's just pretty much like what his half-brother James just wrote about humility. It's probably not hard to understand that God, who is at the center of the universe and bigger and more awesome than any of us can ever comprehend, it is beyond our comprehension that He is humbler than you and I. What is amazing about the history of Jesus was that He was the one who deserved to be honored and exalted, but He humbled Himself. He stripped Himself of His position and His right to be at the right hand of God, and He became small and unpretentious as a little baby and was dependent upon a teenage girl as He grew to be a man. He spent His time with lepers and no one else would be around, and the marginalized. He washed the feet of His disciples because He humbled Himself. He even invited them to share a last meal. So maybe, and here's the conclusion, don't miss it. Maybe today we need to get recentered into God through humility. Maybe today we humble ourselves and come before Him. There's probably no more humbling a time in the life of this church than on those Sundays when we have bread and cup communion.